Hello, and thanks for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's coverage of the general election. My name is Emily Brewer, and I'll be your moderator tonight. This program is part of a series of candidate forums hosted by Town Meeting TV in advance of the general election on Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. These forums are made possible by Town Meeting TV's generous underwriting partners. You can find all our forums at cctv.org/general or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel, where auto-generated captions are available. If you're tuning in on YouTube, click the subscribe button to stay tuned into local democracy this election season. On tonight's program, I am joined by Daisy Berbecco and Chloe Tomlinson, the two candidates running for two open seats in the Chittenden 21 Representative District, which covers the city of Winooski. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back. My name is Daisy Berbecco, and I am running for re-election. This would be my second term serving as state representative for Winooski. Last time I was on the House Healthcare Committee, and I worked for reproductive rights, gender-affirming healthcare, as well as on some gun legislation to address suicide prevention. Also worked a lot on reducing costs of healthcare through chipping away at things like prior authorization for primary providers. And I think most importantly, I worked successfully as part of a three-party committee and developed deep respect for those folks on my committee and was really successful in passing some important legislation. I think I brought value to the body overall as one of few people with behavioral health experience in the legislature, and we really need that right now. So we have challenges coming at us this next biennium, especially when we look at our healthcare system as a whole, the affordability of it, when we look at some of the problems that we're facing with our hospital system, and I'm really ready to take those on. I think Winooski needs leadership that's well-versed in systems change, especially when it comes to the social drivers of health. And most importantly, someone who's a parent with young children in the school system right now, that all these policies are really going to impact that we're making right now. So glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daisy. And now we'll go to Chloe. Can you tell us why you're running and what experience qualifies you to serve as state representative?
Thanks, Emily, and thanks so much, Town Meeting TV, for having us and the important work that you all do. My name is Chloe Tomlinson, and I'm running for state representative because I want a future for Vermont where we have well-connected and resilient communities, where everyone has access to stable and affordable housing, and where Vermont is a leader in addressing the impacts of the climate crisis. But today, I see that many friends and fellow community members, neighbors are really struggling to figure out how to afford housing and how to even stay in our state. And as we've been hit by several rounds of catastrophic flooding just in the past year and a half, it's clear that the climate crisis is here in Vermont on our doorsteps. I believe we need more representatives who know what it feels like to try to find housing in a rental market with less than 1% vacancy rate, and representatives who are younger and who will inherit the impact of the climate crisis and the important decisions that are being made in our legislature today. I come with a background in social work and community development. I started my career working in refugee resettlement and on a crisis hotline, and now have over 10 years of experience leading up to my time currently working at Front Porch Forum. I also volunteer with organizations whose missions I really care about, Local Motion, Democracy Creative, and Vermont Garden Network. But overarchingly, my career has been focused on supporting communities to set a shared vision for their future and come up with tangible ways to work towards that vision. And I hope to bring that skill set and sensibility to Montpelier representing Winooski.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. And with that, we'll jump right into our question portion of the evening. So starting with Chloe, this question has to do with property taxes and education. This year, many Vermonters will see a double-digit increase in their property taxes, and nearly a third of school budgets failed on town meeting day. How will you approach education funding reform and property taxes for the coming fiscal year?
Mm-hmm. So the property tax rate increase that we saw, I think, it isn't sustainable. Luckily, Winooski was kind of spared from the brunt of it. But at the same time, there's sort of this underlying challenge with our education funding because it relies so heavily on property taxes. And property taxes are inherently a regressive form of taxation, meaning that the wealthiest folks in our state effectively pay a lower percentage of their income in those taxes compared to low and middle income Vermonters. And so my concern is that these types of property tax hikes are really, hitting lower and mid-income Vermonters and Vermonters on a fixed income harder than other folks at a time when affordability is increasingly challenging. So I think there's a few things that we can do to try to tackle this. One thing would be looking at a more progressive property tax model and taxing different types of property at different rates. For example, considering taxing second homes at a higher rate than primary residences. Additionally, the cost of health insurance going up is a primary driver, and for multiple reasons, I think we need to address the rising cost of health insurance, but this would be one of them, and making progress on that would help with our school budget challenges. And finally, increasingly, it's really important to invest in mental health support for students, but it's my understanding that those line items in school budgets, they've been moved to school budgets from the general fund and from human services over the past few years. And while the education fund draws on property taxes primarily, the general fund draws primarily on income taxes, which are inherently more progressive. So making that move could help to both continue to provide those important services while moving it to a fund that is not burdening our already burdened school budgets.
Okay, thank you very much. And Daisy, how will you approach education funding reform and property taxes for the coming fiscal year?
Thank you, Chloe, for setting that up. I think everything you said, especially the part about, I think, our mental health supports in schools and addressing the high cost of insurance in our education fund. I think that's a huge, huge hit, is the price of insurance for school staff and teachers. So we do have hopes of addressing that, as well as looking at SB 6, which is the funding for mental health supports for schools. I think looking at that formula and making sure that we're drawing down the full benefits of federal funding opportunities is important. We want to make sure we're not leaving any funds on the table, but also that kids are getting the care that they need. Mm-hmm. So we did do some things, I think, last biennium. We passed a bill for BOCES, which allows BOCES is the Boards of Cooperative Education Services, and it allows school districts to share some of the resources and services. So like if they have a specialist in behavioral health, they can share that between schools if that person actually has enough time. But I think allowing supervisory unions to share some of those supports, hopefully we'll begin to see some change. But there's going to be a lot of difficult decisions to be made. I know some things I've heard is, consolidating schools, closing schools, things that nobody really wants to think of, mandating class sizes, local decision making versus regional decision making. They're all things that are going to be difficult conversations, but I think we all know that it's time to have those difficult conversations, and we need to send people to the State House who are willing to have those conversations and show up and represent Winooski in those mm-hmm. difficult conversations.
Well, thank you both very much. And we will move on to this next question, which has to do with public safety and criminal justice. So we'll start with Daisy for this question. Public safety is a top priority for many voters in this election. This past session, lawmakers increased judicial staff, increased retail theft penalties, and expanded restorative justice practices in Vermont. What more needs to be done by the legislature to advance public safety and repair Vermont's criminal justice system?
This is such a huge question. I'll try to be brief, and I'll talk about the portion of it that I feel I can add value, and that's the portion that I know and the portion that I really work in. And it's the piece where folks who have mental health issues and addiction issues come into contact with the justice system. So I sit on a couple commissions that deal with behavioral health. Well, one is the Behavioral Health in the Courts Commission, which is made up of members from 3 branches of our government. And we meet regularly to collaborate on how we can reform the way that folks come into contact with the justice system so that we can really prioritize diversion efforts and diverting people to treatment rather than just putting them in jail and prison where we know they're not going to get the care and treatment that they really need. And we're exchanging models and approaches and programs with other states. We have a lot of wonderful guest speakers, and I really want to commend the judicial branch, which has led a lot of these efforts. And they've already done a lot of incredible work, and I feel really fortunate to be part of those efforts. I'm also on the Prison Research and Innovation Network that DOC is leading. It's a project of the Brookings Institute, and Vermont was one of 5 states that got admitted to this project. It was for 5 years. I've seen incredible transformations happen there. The Southern State Correctional Facility was sort of the model institution that we did this in. And I think it's great. We've seen incredible things happen in the facility there. But again, my sort of corner is I would like to see more reform happen at the diversion point and really making sure that, before people end up in the wrong spot, we're getting them the care and the treatment that they need.
Great, thank you. And like many of these questions, it's hard to be brief because it does encompass so many issues that are relevant in our community and that require more than 90 seconds to talk about.
Thank you.
Truly.
Chloe, the same question for you.
Oh, thanks, Daisy, for sharing about that important work. And this is definitely a big question and top of mind for so many people. So I think I'll speak to some of the themes I've heard coming up in conversations with community members and some of the things I think we can hopefully move forward in the upcoming session. One is gun violence prevention, and I know the legislature did some really important work on this in the past session that we can continue to build on. But particularly with the gun violence incident that happened in Burlington over the summer, there's kind of a renewed push to pass that charter change that came from Burlington voters. And while, of course, that's not in our district, I think it's still relevant, and I think it's important to pass those charter changes. Additionally, I've heard from folks appreciating models where law enforcement efforts are complemented by social outreach workers. We have that in Winooski, and I think as we're looking at that model, successes of that model, it's important to make sure that we're appropriately resourcing the agencies and really supporting the workers who are on the front lines of those endeavors. So that's something that I think would be a priority as well. And then finally, working on supporting emergency responders through a reliable, secure, and interoperable public safety communication system is important. And there's the start of that has happened through Act 76, and there's a task force I think you might be involved with, or we're sharing some information about. Anyway, that is working on next steps for that, and I think we just need to make sure that that's moving ahead as an important piece of communications infrastructure for our emergency responders. And overall, I think though I've heard from community members and personally really feel that it's important to keep front and center addressing the underlying causes of public safety issues that we're seeing, making sure that folks have access to quality jobs with a livable wage, that we're supporting unions, that people have access to physical and mental health care and treatment for substance use disorder. And so I think that broader picture is also important in addition to some of the measures that we can take to address the challenges that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you both. This next question has to do with healthcare, and we will start with Chloe. So one of the primary drivers in rising school budgets and affordability issues in Vermont is the increasing cost of health insurance, which has already been mentioned, but what can the state do to reduce the cost of healthcare and meet the healthcare needs of every Vermonter?
Another very big question. So it's clear that insurance costs in Vermont are they're some of the highest in the country, and at the same time, we're seeing reports coming from the Green Mountain Care Board that our current healthcare system, our hospital system, isn't sustainable. And so I think big hard conversations are going to be happening this session about what to do in order to reform our healthcare system, to make sure our healthcare system is sustainable for future generations. And so I look forward to some of the recommendations that will continue to come from those efforts to look into how to address the underlying causes of some of those challenges. I think also more broadly, I support universal healthcare, and I think that there are ways that we can incrementally work towards that through expanding Medicaid. I think there's efforts underway, a study looking at some tangible ways we can do that, and I support that incremental progress towards hopefully, an ultimate goal of moving towards a universal healthcare system. And just additionally, I think there's some ways that we can better support our healthcare workforce as well. So loan forgiveness programs for healthcare workers who study in and commit to serving in Vermont. And also, I think a lot of things come back to housing, making sure that we have enough affordable housing in our state for the healthcare workforce that we need in order to support our communities.
Thank you very much. And Daisy, the same question on healthcare.
So I think this is going to be, my projection is it's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 priorities for next session. Not just because it's hopefully my committee again, but, and I'm proud that last session we did a lot actually to address this, and I do think that universal healthcare will be incremental. Last session we did increase access quite a lot by, we passed 4 different interstate licensure compacts. So that allows a provider to work, they only need to get 1 license and they can work in several states, any other participating state. They can actually provide care there. And as well, a patient in Vermont can receive care from any practitioner in one of the participating states. We also increased telehealth access. I think that was prompted by COVID, and we were able to sustain some of the policy flexibilities and regulatory flexibilities to allow that to continue. So mental health was actually the highest, had the highest utilization. We reduced the requirement for prior authorizations that were required of primary providers. We did some claims processing changes. We increased eligibility for older Vermonters. And next, we're asking the Green Mountain Care Board to take a look at the cost of prescription drugs. And then, as Chloe mentioned, we're looking at the Act 167 report by Oliver Wayman and some of the recommendations made in that report regarding our hospital system. So I think that is going to keep us very busy in the next 2 years, and we have to look at how that hospital system interfaces with the other specialty parts of our system, maternal health care, birth centers, community health centers, and how people get all this other care, especially when we have, Chittenden County and Winooski, and then the Northeast Kingdom. So I think, Chloe and I are going to have to really go to bat for our urban little city when there are conversations about consolidation that are taking up a lot of air in the room, about consolidating in more rural areas. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to have to be a loud voice, and I think we can do that.
Well, I'll be very curious to see if your prediction comes true, which it sounds like it will be. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. Moving on to our next question here, we're going right through the list. We'll start with Daisy, and this has to do with immigration. So Vermont's population of immigrants, migrants, refugees, and asylees is growing. How can the state better support newcomers and meet language access needs?
There's, I think, quite a long way we have to go. I think we've also seen some great progress with our new Secretary of State, Sarah Copeland-Hanzas, has been an incredible ally, I think, for immigrants and refugees. She's done remarkable things to improve voter access. And Winooski, by the way, is one of only 2 cities that has all citizen voting for local elections. And I think we might take that as a model that we could spread across the state. That would be one suggestion. The other thing is just getting information out there of what we already have available. Like we have New American College grants at they're through VSAC. And just getting that information out there of what we actually already have, I think would go a long way.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Chloe, how can the state better support newcomers and meet language access needs?
So as I mentioned before, I actually earlier in my career worked in refugee resettlement, and my work was focused on securing housing for families as they were arriving, and also supporting food security challenges for both newly arrived families and also folks who'd been in the community for some time. And so even at that time, finding stable, affordable housing was incredibly challenging, and I can't even imagine how challenging that job is today. And the top thing that I've heard talking with new American families in Winooski is that their top need and challenge is finding stable, affordable housing that's appropriately sized for families, so 3+ bedroom units, and yeah, that can support a family with kids or multi-generational household. And so I think that really needs to be a top priority, expanding our affordable housing stock. Additionally, I think pathways to quality jobs is really important, and there's been some progress made in terms of pathways to the police academy, pathways to licensure for people who have a career in their country of origin that they're hoping to step back into here in Vermont. And so I think that is a really big opportunity as a win-win for building our workforce in areas where we may have gaps, and also economic stability for families who are getting started here. And in terms of language access, the state's Office of Racial Equity put together a really excellent report with recommendations, and I think it's really just a question of making sure that those recommendations are resourced. And one particular item that stood out to me from that was just supporting our language service providers and multilingual liaisons. And I know in Winooski in particular, they play such a critical role in the school, but also in the broader community of kind of being a bridge. And so I think we need to make sure we're supporting that important work.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. And we'll move on to this last question here before we get to the lightning round, which has to do with political temperature. So political differences were front and center this biennium, with the governor vetoing a record number of bills passed by the legislature, and the legislature in turn overriding a record number of those vetoes. Talk about a time you worked across differences to accomplish something and how you might approach collaborating with colleagues you don't always agree with. And we will start with Chloe.
Sure, a really important question. And what comes to mind for me is my work with Front Porch Forum. I work on our community management team, and every day we're supporting communities across the state who are having sometimes challenging, heated conversations. And when those conversations come up, what we try to do is keep, first of all, our mission front and center of connecting neighbors and building communities, and in guiding those conversations to remind participants to really focus on the issues rather than the person. So focusing on sort of what is the challenge and what is your opinion on that, rather than heated personal attacks. And I think I would bring, and I do bring in other areas of my life, a similar approach of figuring out how can we find places of connection, where can we connect on values, where can we connect on a shared vision, even if we're disagreeing on the how of getting there, and avoiding personal attacks and assuming intent, which can be a really tough one, and focusing on asking quality questions and really getting to the why. So that's kind of the sensibility I think that I would want to bring to the legislature.
Thank you. And Daisy, talk about a time you worked across differences to accomplish something and how you might approach collaborating with colleagues you don't always agree with.
So there is an area in the State House cafeteria which you often find a lot of Republicans, not a lot of Democrats or progressives typically. And I have a couple Republicans, very notorious Republicans in the Healthcare Committee, who I love dearly. I don't love how they vote always, but as people, I love them. And I've developed that respect for them through sharing food. And it took a while, right? But, we somehow got talking about, what we did in the summer. And I said, oh, well, I go home to Alaska and I fish. And you're kidding me. Oh my gosh, do you get any halibut? Yeah, I got a 97-pound halibut this summer. Oh my God, you bring me some, I'll bring you some of my lamb. So I've developed this, sharing of food with a lot of people who vote completely differently than me. And we've developed friendships around something that many people do, and it's sharing a personal part of our lives that's meaningful to us, and it disarms people. Everybody loves food, right? And you share such a personal part of you. It makes it so much easier to work together. So I think, coming into that building, I wish I had known how significant of an impact that would have.
It is fascinating how something like food can bring people together, because you can't get away from it. Everybody needs to eat. So.
Yes.
All right, well, we have just enough time to quickly get through this lightning round before we wrap up with closing statements. So essentially how the lightning round works is I'm going to ask a series of questions. You can answer with either a yes or a no, and if you want to elaborate, as I'm sure you probably will on some of these, and again, 10 seconds is nothing compared to 90 seconds, and for some of these it's a little harder to sum it up with a yes or no, but try your best. And so essentially what I'll do is I'll ask the question. I think for the sake of time and ease, Daisy, if you want to just answer first every time, and then Chloe, and we'll just go right down the list, as long as you both are okay with that. Mm-hmm. So this first question is, do you support a statewide ban on assault weapons?
Yes, and sponsored legislation on it last year.
Yes.
Okay. The next question is, should legislators be paid more?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yes.
And should Vermont have publicly financed elections?
I need to look into it more. I think the current system has a lot of weaknesses, but I don't understand publicly financed well enough to say yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And this next question is, do you support the just cause eviction charter changes passed at the local level?
Yes, and I sponsored a bill on it.
Okay.
Yes, and I think we should look into statewide legislation on this as well.
Great. And do you support banning or limiting student cell phone use in schools?
Yes, it's better for their mental health.
Yes, at least limiting. Not certain about banning, but at least limiting.
Alrighty. And what was the first political campaign you worked on?
My class president campaign in 6th grade.
That's awesome.
Starting young. I think it was door knocking for Obama's 2012 campaign.
Okay, wonderful. And what's a small business in Vermont that you frequent?
Sneakers.
Nice.
Mountain Valley, Winooski Wheels, Scout, Monkey House. We've got a lot to work with in Winooski.
You guys sure do. And finally, who are you supporting in the presidential election?
Kamala.
Yeah, Kamala Harris.
Okay, you guys, thank you very much for bearing with us there at the lightning round. Those are always kind of fun, but like I said, some of them require a little bit more elaboration, but we appreciate the trying your best there. And so we have a few minutes here left before we wrap up, which means that I'm going to jump to closing statements. So I'm going to start with Chloe. And Chloe, if you could try to keep it to around 30 seconds, please give us your closing statement.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Emily, for moderating this evening. I am really keen to bring my skills and experience to Montpelier and work on advancing affordable housing, renter protections, and taking bold action on climate. And I'm really keen to hear from folks in Winooski about what ideas you have, suggestions, concerns. So please feel free to reach out anytime. I really love having those conversations. You can email me at chloe4winooski@gmail.com. And you can also find more information about me and other ways to get in touch on my website. That's chloe4winooski.org. And I hope that you'll consider voting for me on or before November 5th.
Daisy, your closing statement.
Thanks for joining us tonight, and Emily, thanks for having us. Please reach out to me if you'd like to be in touch, have questions about anything we discussed tonight or anything that we didn't discuss. My email is daisyburbeckovt@gmail.com. And please, when you go to vote at the polls on November 5th, I hope you will support me in my re-election so I can get back to work for you.
Well, always a pleasure, and thank you again to Daisy Berbecco and Chloe Tomlinson for joining us tonight. And thank you all for tuning in to Town Meeting TV's ongoing coverage of local candidates, local budgets, and ballot items. You can find this and many more forums at cctv.org/general. You can watch all our forums that we've recorded previously on demand there, or on our Town Meeting TV YouTube channel. Don't forget to cast your ballot in the general election on or before November 5th. Then tune in to Town Meeting TV's result recap show that evening after the polls close. Please contact your local clerk to find out how to obtain a ballot and to register to vote. And just a reminder that in Vermont, you can register to vote on Election Day. And thank you again for watching and sharing Town Meeting TV. Have a great evening.